So, about a week or so ago, depending on when this video comes out, I made a little review talking about Dragon Quest I HD Remake. I mentioned how good it was and how thankful I was that Square had given me the opportunity, which I'll say again, thank you for the review code, Square. I'm very honored you trusted me with this. And now, with it beaten, I finally had the 2 remake ready to review. Like Dragon Quest I, I am going into this game completely blind. Not really sure what I was supposed to expect with this sequel, as most discussion over Dragon Quest is usually about 1 or 3 with this trilogy. So I was going into 2 with little to no knowledge. And as a result, I was blown away. This might be the #1 surprise hit of the year for me in terms of RPGs. Like, I was expecting to have fun with it considering I've liked both 1, 3, and 11, but I'm genuinely shocked at how much I ended up enjoying this. To the point where I actually think it might be my favorite Dragon Quest so far. Yeah, even more than 3, I was that blown away. But why? What was so good about this remake that actively has me thinking it's better than 3 or even 11? Well, how about I quit my yapping and get into the video to explain it to you. Once again, thank you so much for this, Square. I really appreciate it, and I hope we can work together in the future under more Dragon Quest remakes. With all that said, welcome to my review of Dragon Quest II. Hey, that rhymed. Alright, first and foremost, let's get into one of my many pieces of praise for this game by talking about just how fucking pretty this whole game is. Now, I've gushed time and time again about how much I adore the HD 2D art style, and how I genuinely think it's the best art style we have for video games as of right now. I also believe that Dragon Quest has been doing the best out of every HD 2D game that's come out, and the 2 remake is another perfect example of just how good these games translate to it. A lot of what I can praise about Dragon Quest II's graphics are very reminiscent to what I said about the Dragon Quest I remake. Absolutely incredible looking character models with a lot of cool little details that add more personality to the characters, like the little crumble anger balls or the sweat drops, insanely stunning looking towns and dungeons, and some really beautiful 2D art whenever it's added in. These games are just an absolute treat for the eyes and really show just how much Square has improved their 2D style to make it wholly their own. If they ever plan to remake 4 through 6, I really hope they give it this style as well. I'd be fine with them being more anime-like what they were doing with 7, sure, but the pixel addict in me is always going to prefer how this looks in comparison to how this looks. And while this game definitely looks great, it doesn't hold a candle to just how good it feels to play. So how about instead of continuously gushing about the graphics, we go ahead and start continuously gushing about the amazing gameplay. Now, in comparison to Dragon Quest I, which is basically a one-man army journey, or Dragon Quest III when it was their first ever implementation of job systems, Dragon Quest II is about as traditional an RPG as you can get. It's a party of 4 with standard turn-based gameplay, with each character having their own strengths and weaknesses. The main character you play as cannot use magic and has the slowest natural speed stat, which may sound pretty bad, but the trade-off is you do colossal levels of physical damage as a result, which goes absolutely insane when combined with things like his muster strength skill, or one of your party members using oomph or an oomph powder. The next character who joins you in the journey is Caradoc, who is basically a jack of all trades and becomes an absolute menace in the late game due to all of the multi-hit attacks he can learn. From multi-slice to giga slash, he becomes an absolute demon and can wipe out any mob in his way. The next party member to join your team is Perenal. I don't think I'm saying that right, but I'm just going by what I think it is. Who basically takes the role of mage of the group, and comes stacked with healing and status buff/debuff skills that become immensely handy with late game bosses. And the last party member you get is Caradoc's little sister, Matilda. She joins pretty late into the game, but the trade-off is she has the best natural speed stat, and with the white weapons and scroll usage, you can turn her into a devastating DPS. It's through mixing and matching these 4 together that you bring your characters to the best of their abilities in order to rip apart all the mobs and bosses that stand in front of you. Also, for the gameplay itself, well, it's Dragon Quest combat, plain and simple. Satisfying turn-based gameplay that is easy to learn but hard to master, with a mix of all new stuff by adding in the sigils you get from Dragon Quest 1 and 3, which can allow you to heal more from items, landing more criticals, or my personal favorite, if your health is halfway or below, you can use the sigil to make several of your spells or techniques evolve to a stronger form and do a lot more damage, which can massively come in clutch for certain bosses. The gameplay captures a really good RNG feel to the whole thing, where you just get the ecstatic feeling of landing a critical hit at the final moment with a souped up attack to kill the boss. The gameplay overall isn't inherently unique as 1 or 3 was, but at the same time it didn't really need to be. As long as it was fun and well made, you don't really need to be gimmicky or different. And boy oh boy, Dragon Quest II was a fucking blast. If the 7 remake ends up being this fun, then I am in for a banger time in a couple of months. Fingers crossed, baby. Fingers crossed. And while I, without a doubt, loved the gameplay, that wasn't really the biggest surprise for me with 2. To me, this game's most surprising aspect was that the story was actually a lot more interesting than I expected. So, similar to the Dragon Quest I remake, there was a lot more added to this narrative in comparison to its NES original. And while the other 2 remakes do this pretty well, they never really capture that feeling of improving upon the original's narrative like 2 seems to. And that's mainly due to the fact that your party actually interacts with each other. Now in 1, it's a solo journey, so you weren't really interacting with anyone outside of the NPCs you met throughout your story. And while in 3 you had a party of 4, none of them really talked to each other. And the only really emotional moments are the flashbacks you get of the main character's dad. But in Dragon Quest II, despite your main character never really talking to the other 3 party members, your gaggle of pals actually all have their own little personality traits that make them immensely charming, alongside some great banter and understandable goals and motivations. I think the best character in the party in terms of writing is Perenelle, due to the fact that she has to basically grapple with the fact that the monsters destroyed her entire village and killed everyone she loved. As a result, her journey is more one of revenge, and learning that not all monsters are the same when she and the cast meet a monster that regrets his actions. I'll be talking about him later, because admittedly, while I think his story is one of the best, it's also one of the worst parts about this narrative. But for what it's worth, I really do like the fact that Perenelle actually has a character arc to her. And the other personal favorite was actually Caradoc, just due to how likable and funny he is. He's just a big ray of sunshine that doesn't really have a filter, but he always means well. One of my favorite moments is at the very start of the game, when you get the Perenelle into your party, and on the very first night you guys are together as a team, he brings you out to talk and says that he just wants to give her the family that she doesn't have anymore. It's a very sweet scene that really makes me love him right off the bat. He's just a big, lovable ball of autism. That's my Spectrum son right there. You will not insult him. Matilda's also awesome. She's very fun, and while I don't think she's as interesting or engaging as the other 2, she's a very charming character in her own rights. And while the characters are great, the story itself is no slouch either, as there are quite a few things I like about it. Like, the monster thing I mentioned earlier was obviously one of them, and the cast interactions in several of the cities are very fun to engage with. I do have a couple issues with it overall, don't get me wrong. It's definitely enjoyable, but there are some places where I think it kind of stumbles. We'll talk about that later. But for the most part, it's a very serviceable narrative with some very good character moments. Of course, all of these amazing battles and moments are tied together with yet another stellar soundtrack. Composed once again by the late great Koichi Sugiyama, he brings yet another fantastic set of tunes to give you eargasm after eargasm. I've said it in one review and I'll say it again. I hope you rested in peace, sir, knowing how much this work has influenced RPG music in general. One of the greatest musical icons in RPGs next to the legendary Uematsu. 2 of the greatest to ever do it, man. I really don't think RPG music is going to be the same since they're both done with making them. And with that said, those are all of my pros. I had a lot to praise about this game. Way more than expected, honestly. But with every pro, there comes some cons. So how about we get into those next? Now, obviously, if you couldn't tell, I loved this game. And I very much stand by the fact that I think this was one of my biggest gaming surprises this year. However, while I did end up adoring it, I do admittedly have a few issues with the title overall that I wanted to talk about. Now, obviously, none of those have to do with the visuals. This game looks pretty much perfect in every regard, so we're just going to skip over that and instead start with talking about my issues with the gameplay. Now, for the most part, gameplay is fantastic. I love the smooth turn-based fights, I love the challenge, and I love the customization. However, I don't think every aspect of it was, well, perfect. And one of my biggest issues is how scrolls were implemented in this game in comparison to 1. Personally, I think they're kind of a downgrade in comparison. Unlike Dragon Quest I, scrolls are now tied to certain party members being able to learn them, instead of just having the one party member that can learn all the techniques. And I get it, that makes sense from a balancing perspective. You can't really expect gameplay to be perfectly focused if you're just dumping every scroll into one character. It does, however, start becoming a problem when you just can't use your scrolls to teach spells or abilities to certain party members. Certain party members will learn spells naturally as they level up, but due to this, there will be moments where you will have a scroll and you just can't teach it to anyone because the characters can't learn the spell, and one of them already knows it. Now you probably think to yourself, okay, this really isn't a problem when you talk it out loud, why not just give it to your last party member? You get 4 of them after all. You would be right. However, I mentioned earlier that you don't really get your 4th party member until around the halfway point of the main story. And if you've been properly leveling up your 3 party members, then they'll probably know a good amount of spells and abilities that you can no longer teach them through the use of scrolls. So now you just have these scrolls sitting in your party for literal hours on end until you get the last member. It may not seem like a massive issue, But when you have to basically ignore one of the main mechanics of the game because of its own limitations, it's kind of frustrating and kills a bit of the customization. Sort of one of the few times where I really wish the main character could have used spells, because that would have instantly taken away my complaints. But because of story reasons, he can't. You're kind of just stuck with this dead weight for literal hours until Matilda joins. Outside of that, the only other complaint I had about the gameplay is with one of the post-game dungeons called the Cave of Confusion. I, no joke, consider it probably the worst Dragon Quest dungeon I've experienced out of all 4 of the games I played. But why is that? Are the enemies annoying here? Actually, no. In truth, next to the Cloud Gate Citadel, this is an immensely good place to grind your characters in order to take on the true final boss. Because of the boss fight? No, because, well, this dungeon doesn't have one. You just fight a bunch of really tough enemies and gain a bunch of levels here. The problem is just the design, really. It's really boring. The entire thing is just reusing assets from the entire Erdrick trilogy to make each floor, and while it was cool at first to see areas from Dragon Quest III show up, it unfortunately loses its luster due to just how long this dungeon is. Not only does it do the really annoying concept of if you go into the wrong exit, you have to redo the entire floor, but the entire dungeon is 25 floors long. It's so agonizingly boring by the halfway point that I don't really blame anybody if they just started spamming the spell that keeps monsters away to get through it. As good as an area as it is for grinding, they made this dungeon way too long. And well, I can normally just say it's post-game because it's, post-game, so it's entirely skippable. You kinda can't, because this dungeon is the only way to unlock the true final boss and ending. I really do think they could have cut like 5 to 7 floors here, and while it wouldn't have saved its underwhelming design, it definitely would have been a lot more bearable. And honestly, those are all of my complaints in terms of gameplay. So let me talk about my issues with the story. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to need to get into some spoiler territory here, so if you want to experience this game as blind as possible, I highly recommend skipping to this part here. But if you don't care and just want to see what I disliked about its narrative, well, here we go. So while the story itself is very serviceable, there were some aspects to the additive narrative that I felt like could have used a bit of improvement. The first bit that could have used a little more time in the oven was the subplot about monsters being understanding of the harm they're causing humans through the character of Elmu, a cute little guy that, after a boss fight, realizes the error of his ways and wants to change for the better. He has a pretty fun dynamic with the party as they slowly bond with each other and realize that not all monsters are pure evil. He even goes as far as sacrificing his own life to protect the gate so he can give our heroes a chance to stop Hargon. It's a great moment that shows his humanity, and I admittedly got a little choked up when he passes away because I actually did end up caring about this guy through the interactions. Seeing his final moments of being a hero that gives everything to help his friends genuinely got to me. So I have such high praise for this. Why is it in the cons? Well, I just kind of wish we saw more of it outside of him. The idea that there are monsters in this world that can coexist with humans is a very interesting story to tell in a Dragon Quest game. Especially since most of the time we're just slaughtering these guys. It's a cool concept. The problem is, outside of Elmo and to an extent, the Dragon Lord, if you want to count him, you barely ever see this executed throughout the game. This could have been a really cool part of the story. Like, imagine if this little subplot led to a whole narrative about monsters and humans achieving peace through understanding they don't need to kill each other. That would have been awesome. But it never really goes anywhere, and as a result, it's a lot of missed potential. Hell, they don't even really explore it all that much in the post-game. It really feels like they wanted to do more with it, but most of the time there was no real moment to really focus on it. The most you get is one of the demon generals being in love with Hargon, but at the end, he doesn't give a shit and she just dies. Which is fine, I guess. It's not a horrible storyline thing, but it doesn't really go anywhere considering by the time she realizes this, she's already 1 foot in the grave. It'd be a bit more sad if they gave her a little more focus, but again, she's just one of the demon generals you have to defeat, and she doesn't really do anything outside of her one-sided obsession and be kind of a bitch. I'll give them points for trying, but the execution needed a bit of work. And that really wasn't my only complaint with the narrative, as I'm not a huge fan of how they handled aspects of the game's main antagonist, Hargon. Not to say he's horrible, mind you. He's got some good scenes, he's a fun boss fight, and he has all of the aspects you need to make a good villain to take down. And I do like the idea that he was infatuated with the Dragon Queen and became obsessed with her and grew to hate the Erdrick bloodline due to them getting the Sphere of Light in Dragon Quest III. I don't have a problem with any of that. My issue is that they decide to keep all of this pretty interesting backstory stuff tied to the very end of the game. Not even the end of the main game either. You don't get his backstory until you beat the post-game final boss. The big darkness monster that's actually behind everything. Basically, Dark Cloud 2.0. Although, I'd say he's a bit better than Dark Cloud, solely for the fact that they do actually tease his existence at the end of the main game to show there's more to deal with. But even if he's a bit better set up than something like Dark Cloud, he's not very interesting either. He's basically just evil itself that you have to defeat, another Kalasmos to beat down. It's a bit of a shame, but at the same time, the rest of the game is so good I can overlook the few issues I had. And with that, I have no more cons. So let's go ahead and get into my final thoughts. Dragon Quest II Remake was impeccable, bro. I can't believe how much I enjoyed myself with not only this, but the first remake as well. I can definitely say without a shadow of a doubt that this dual remake pack is definitely worth your time and money if you're interested in getting into the franchise. And I have absolutely no problem saying that these are some of the best remakes we've gotten in years. And that is why I have zero problem rating this game a very high 9 out of 10. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and another big thank you to Square Enix for providing me with a code of these games. I have said that a lot with these two videos, but I do really want to stretch that I'm very grateful for this. And again, I hope we can work together in the future on more titles you have coming out. And hey, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, do me a favor and like and subscribe down below. Leave a comment down below if you're up for a chat or just want to help me in the algorithm. And if you want to support me or hang out with my awesome community, I got a Twitch and a Patreon to check out in the description below. That's all, folks. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you next time for more RPG content.